On the weekend of the 24th and 25th of January 1987, two SEX workers vanished from areas near to Paddington Station in London. They had been repeatedly hit. They had compression to the neck and had been cut. Bodies found barely 24 hours apart, in places that they certainly did not belong. The police quickly confirmed that a crazed man was on the loose, but still unsolved today, it remains one of the most perplexing, unsolved double murders in Britain. Who was it? You decide. This is the case of Marina Monty and Rachel Applewhite. Marina Monty was born in Edmonton on the 13th of September 1959. Little is known about her upbringing, her parents, what she liked or disliked, what she was good at. But by 1987, Britain was in a slump. The unemployment was high, the pound was weak, and by now Marina's family had all moved away to warmer climates, leaving Marina behind in Britain. Marina was in an on and off again relationship with her boyfriend, and she had now resorted to selling herself for cash. In the weeks before her murder, she moved into a shabby cold DHS hostel at the Shelbourne Hotel. Marina had found it hard to hold down a job due to her issues with substances and found selling herself was an easy way of earning money. On Saturday the 24th of January 1987, Marina had set off out the door with her red lipstick on. It matched her red knee-high boots. She carried a white shoulder bag, and that evening Marina met her first man, earning herself £30. This was at the back of Bayswater tube station in London, before she walked the dark streets looking to buy her substance of choice. After subsequently getting high and being seen by the dealer at around 10 p.m, Marina was never seen again, and the following day, on Sunday the 25th of January 1987, Marina had been found slumped in a ditch. She had lost her life. Marina's body had been discovered by a railway worker leaving to go home after a night shift. She had been dumped on a lane near to the Mitre Bridge Junction, a short distance off Scrubs Lane. She had compression to the neck, and her boots and handbag were both missing. A signalman working the night shift in the signal box on the evening of the 24th of January said that he noticed a small car pull in to a service road by the side of the railway line. He told police that as he watched, the car had stayed parked up there for approximately 4 to 5 minutes before driving off. Before long, the body of Marina Monty lay on a cold, hard slab in Kensington Hospital, awaiting examination. And while Marina lay there, another girl with a similar lifestyle was about to become the next girl to also go missing. It was Saturday the 24th of January 1987. 23-year-old Rachel Applewhite and her boyfriend Ian were sat watching the television in their hotel room in Earl's Court in London before the pair went to look for business on the streets of London. Yes, Rachel was also selling herself for cash, and at around 7 p.m. the pair arrived at Cleveland Terrace, where Rachel chatted up men hoping to find a client. She did not have to wait too long, as before long her first client of the evening arrived. A man in an orange Mini pulled up next to her. Ian, her boyfriend, checked out the car as he always did. He didn't seem to find any issues, so Rachel got into the car with the man, said goodbye, and they drove off. Now, Rachel would normally spend around 25 to 30 minutes with each client. However, on this occasion, she was gone for 2 hours, and by now it was 9 p.m. Ian was starting to become a little uneasy when Rachel suddenly arrived back in Cleveland Terrace. Rachel was described by people as being quite a loud character, could often be quite aggressive, and on top of this, she had an increasing problem with drinking. After Rachel returned from her first client after 2 hours, she was already intoxicated, leading to the pair having a loud row on the street. A cab driver in the area was a witness to this, as he saw Rachel trying to get into his cab before Ian pulled her out. The couple continued to argue for a short time before the driver saw them both go off in opposite directions. This was the last time her boyfriend Ian would ever see Rachel again. Rachel spoke on the phone with her father the following day at 12:30 p.m. She told him that she had an argument with Ian and was staying with friends. She did not tell her dad where she was calling from, what the place was called, or who she was staying with. But that evening, Rachel went to the King's Head public house on Edgware Road. She was seen there with a man and another friend. Her boyfriend was not out with her and probably had no idea where she was after they were not talking from the row. Rachel Applewhite was seen with a man who was described as having olive skin. The pair had entered the pub in London called the King's Head together. This pub was only 2 streets from the red lights district of Sussex Gardens, Cleveland Terrace and Paddington Station, where she often picked up men. As the evening progressed, Rachel was described as being so drunk that she could hardly walk. Several eyewitnesses, including friends, several customers in the bar and bar staff, also confirmed that Rachel was seen drinking in the bar, but she was also not dressed as she would normally dress. She would normally dress in a black jumper, blue denim skirt, and wear blue shin-high denim boots. And Rachel was quite a fashionable person and always made an effort with her appearance. But instead, that night it seemed odd as she was wearing what looked like a second-hand blue and purple hotel maid's outfit, which was made from hard-wearing polyester. And with the dress being about 12 to 14 and Rachel barely being a size 10, it looked like a baggy costume. The uniform wasn't hers, and Rachel was not a maid, and her own clothes seemed to be missing. She was carrying a white plastic bag that was not big enough to hold whatever was in it. It certainly made the last official sighting of Rachel all the more credible, as Rachel had argued and fought with Deborah, her friend, that night in the pub after she mocked Rachel's outfit. Many people were staring, wondering why she was dressed that way. Some people were making fun of her. They were asking, "What on earth are you wearing, Rachel?" So after arguing with her friend and just before last orders, Rachel was asked to leave the pub. Rachel walked out of the pub, again with this olive-skinned man who appeared to be sober in comparison to her. The witnesses stated that the pair got into a car before driving off together in what people described as a small, possibly light-coloured car. Its make and registration were unknown. But Rachel would never be seen again, and the Kensington slab would now have another body to examine. On Monday the 26th of January 1987, in South Kensington, 2 miles south of the pub where Rachel was last seen, a resident in an affluent area was returning home from a weekend away. Driving down the busy A308 Fulham Road, she then pulled into a gap between a cafe and a dress shop. She opened and unlocked the wrought iron gates to her home. She drove into a private area known as Sydney Close. It's a place you would only know about if you lived there, if you were one of 20 residents who parked their cars in the private garages, being cramped and surrounded on all sides by the backs of 4- and 5-story Victorian terraced houses. Even on the brightest of days, the sun struggled to reach the floor, but at night it was fully unlit. It was only illuminated by the odd bedroom light or occasional headlight. Like the lay-by at Mitre Bridge Junction, this car had chosen a location which was isolated and dark. At the rear of number 30 to 31 Sumner Place, the resident only used her garage for storage. As she opened the green steel door at the back corner, her headlights illuminated what she described as a bundle of rags, a phrase identical to the security guard who found Marina's body. As her eyes were drawn to the bare, pale legs of a small woman curled up in a fetal position, the police were called and arrived within minutes, and the scene was sealed off. As before, the body looked as if it had been dumped from a car, but this time the killer had reversed in as it wouldn't be seen by the flats overlooking it. With no signs of a struggle or bloodstains that proved she had been murdered elsewhere and driven here in the boot of a car, and with it being a frostless night, the tyre marks were unreadable, and the axle width suggested that it was a small car. As with Marina, Rachel's boots were missing and were never to be found, and with her feet being bare, not dirty, it was said that she'd not walked there. Her clothes were the same blue and purple hotel maid's outfit that she was seen wearing in the pub just hours before, but no traces of mud, dirt or oil on them. She must have been killed inside a room or in a car and was only taken outside when her murderer carried her out. Like Marina, Rachel had been beaten around the head and face until she rendered unconscious, then compression to the neck with some kind of ligature. Although Marina's injuries were limited, were injuries upon Rachel's legs, face, head. There were bruised imprints of a man's size 7 to 8 boot, as he repeatedly stamped on her body, breaking her nose, cheekbone and teeth. And yet he still had not stopped there. He'd used instruments to batter her around the head and face in what police believed was some kind of frenzied attack. Forensic scientists believed that it was either a wrench or a tire iron, and could also not rule out a chainsaw. As police got to work speaking to witnesses, they soon realised that the last sighting of Rachel alive was in the pub that night. Now this posed 3 big questions. Was it a premeditated attack, or one of her substance pimps, substance dealer or spree murderer, with a hatred of sex workers akin to the Yorkshire RIPPER? Now if the man responsible was the olive-skinned man, then why did he take her to a public house where people knew her, where she was dressed in such a way that it would draw attention to her, where he would be seen, where his face would be seen in such a public way? And if he had lashed out in a pre-sex rage, why murder her? After 4 days having carried out autopsies on both the bodies, detectives confirmed that we do feel that both cases are linked and the work of a very violent man, as there are too many similarities to be coincidental, they said. Both women were in their 20s, their weight and size being basically the same, both being barely 5 feet tall, both being sex workers for 4 years. They'd worked the same streets, possibly the same pimp, and maybe they even knew each other, as they picked up clients literally 100 yards apart. The last client had owned a small, possibly light-coloured car, and their bodies were found dumped miles from where they were last seen, in a quiet place where they didn't belong. Both women had compression to the neck with a ligature, a belt or tie, which was never found at both of the scenes. Both were found beaten around the head and face, and both had no defensive wounds, and both had no sex assault. There was no proof that they'd been robbed for cash, although some of their items were missing, such as their boots, possibly for a trophy. But there was one big difference between the 2 murders. Rachel's was far more savage. The killings were almost certainly committed by a man who had no compassion, someone who could kill at will, who had a history maybe of physical assault on women, somebody maybe who they trusted, as neither women were abducted, and with no empathy. With such levels of violence, the police suspected that he was likely to be a man who was unstable. But who was he? With no witnesses to the murder, no sighting of the car which had dumped her, and no idea who the olive-skinned man was in the ski jacket, detectives had to rely on the limited evidence they had. Their bags and identification nowhere to be found, a positive ID was made by their relatives who'd reported them missing. Questioned over their disappearances, Rachel and Marina's boyfriends remained suspects, as many men were, but with alibis and witnesses to prove their innocence, they were ultimately eliminated. All the usual suspects were rounded up, as well as the former owner of this escort agency in Bayswater, who lived off the earnings of sex workers. He was questioned over the assaults of others, but there didn't seem to be a suspect who actually stood out. Rachel's murder was just as mysterious as Marina's. But what baffled detectives most was the blue and purple polyester uniform that Rachel was wearing for an unknown reason, which, when examined, the uniform's label confirmed that it had been made by Warren Petites, a manufacturer of uniforms sold to the hotels and catering trade. These could also be purchased in uniform shops and via mail order. It wasn't unique enough to identify who had actually bought it in the first place, and it was the type used by mid-range boutique hotels across London, but also in Britain and Europe. It wasn't Rachel's, as it was a size far too big for her, and the arms creased in the wrong place, but faintly written in pen on the collar's label. Months, if not years earlier, someone had written in permanent marker, "Sure wears." It was faded from numerous washes, and although police suspected that this more than likely was its original owner, they were unable to find a P. Suarez missing from any local hotels or any uniforms reported stolen. Police warned people that this terribly dangerous person could strike again, telling women not to walk alone, not to pick up men, but unfortunately women who had substance issues needed their fix, and without cash, they had to get the next hit. So they felt that if they were just vigilant, they'd be okay. With no witnesses to the deaths, the only likely suspect in these killings was the man Rachel was seen with alive. On Thursday, the 5th of February, barely a week after her body was found, police issued a photo fit of the olive-skinned man wearing the ski jacket. It was a risk, as if he was the murderer, it could cause him to go into hiding or flee the country back to his home country, but desperately they needed to find him. Blessed with reliable witnesses, each article stated, "Police want to speak to a man of continental, maybe Greek or Arabic appearance, 5'9" tall, 35 to 40, with black hair, specks of grey, wearing gold-rimmed glasses, and maybe a ski jacket." He was also apparently wearing a large gold medallion ring on one of his fingers. Sadly, it failed to give them the leads they needed, so on Thursday, the 26th of February, detectives called the BBC to broadcast an appeal on the channel's Crime Watch. It was a successful TV show which drew in millions of viewers, especially at night at 9 p.m. At this point, police told the public that he was their only witness, who police believed had information vital to the case, and having televised a recreation of the girl's last sightings and Rachel in the King's Head pub, the unusual uniform she was wearing and where the bodies were found, accompanied by a description of the photo fit of the man they were looking for in regards to Rachel's murder. Police at the murder incident room took a few hundred calls following the episode from friends, associates, witnesses, one of whom was the man himself. He had been watching the TV, recognising the girl on screen, then staring back at the man who looked very much like him. The man had apparently first called his wife back in Mexico 2 days after the broadcast and then called in. 42-year-old Guillermo Suarez walked into Kensington Police Station, where detectives were shocked at how perfectly he matched the photo fit. Mr. Suarez was some kind of administrative role at the Mexican Embassy in West Kensington. This was roughly halfway between the street where Rachel was picked up by her punters and his third-floor flat at the exclusive Coleherne Court in South Kensington. He was also the owner of a small light-coloured car, and when questioned, the man confirmed that he was the man out with Rachel in the pub that night. He told police that he had picked Rachel up that night for the purposes of sex, and that the maid's uniform belonged to his wife, who, although in Mexico, sometimes visited him in London and worked at various hotels in the area. Now, initially he denied leaving the pub with Rachel, so that probably he would not incriminate himself as to being the last person with her. But when confronted with witness testimony that the two got in a car and drove off together, he changed his story and stated that after they left the pub, he drove her back to his flat, where Rachel had apparently gone through his wife's wardrobe, like you do, and had taken a fancy to apparently one of his wife's outfits. This made no sense, as the uniform was unfashionable, uncomfortable, and her denim skirt, boots, black jumper were nowhere to be found. It was her wrong size, and it was apparently laughable. I mean, police asked him if he had dressed Rachel up as some kind of sex fetish, which he refused to answer the question as he feared it might incriminate him. Police had asked for him to come forward. He had come forward as a witness on his own accord, and he was treated accordingly as a witness, not a suspect. Having admitted to paying Rachel £20 that night and having sex with her in his flat, in and around the time that pathologists said that Rachel was murdered, detectives were later able to confront him with the evidence that witnesses had positively identified him as the last man seen with her, and that between the 31st of Jan and the 7th of February, 1 week after both murders were reported, Teresa Mellett, the manageress of a dry cleaners a few streets from the man's flat, identified him as a man who had taken in a bag of bedding that had been soiled with blood. He told the woman behind the counter that his wife had had an accident, but when police checked, his wife in Mexico had not visited the UK for months. This evidence was only circumstantial, but police later confirmed that although he had offered himself up as a witness, as a result, he was later arrested. Mr. Suarez was locked up for 1.5 hours and questioned for more than 30 hours, but on the 1st of March, as they could not charge him, he was de-arrested and released. Forensic tests were carried out on his car and on his flat, but they were unable to prove whether Rachel had actually been there or not, or if she'd been murdered there. It was never reported what make of car he actually had, or if his boot prints matched those which had stamped on Rachel's face. On Monday the 23rd of March, Mr. Suarez was interviewed a second time by detectives, this time about the double murder of Rachel Applewhite and Marina Monty. But again, lacking conclusive evidence, he was released without charge. If this case had occurred today, I'm sure the bedding would have been recovered by police and DNA testing conducted to see if there was a match to Rachel Applewhite's DNA. This would evidently place her at his flat that night at exactly the time that she was murdered. Many questions we'll never know the answer to, as after this point, the information fed to the press dried up. Now, in both murders, police said that he was the most likely suspect. But when a force more powerful than the police took control of the investigation, as although not high-ranking, Mr. Suarez was entitled to protection granted by the 1961 Geneva Convention, diplomatic immunity offered a degree of legal protection to diplomats, their families and staff from criminal and civil prosecution. When Mr. Suarez was arrested, it was reported Mexican charge d'affaires in London was summoned to the Foreign Office, where he was told that British expected the Mexican authorities to waive his protection. Aided by the Mexican ambassador, he refused to answer further questions, and like most people in powerful places, their influential friends sought to protect them. On the 1st of July 1987, an inquest into the murder of Rachel Applewhite was held at Hammersmith's Coroner's Court as presided by Dr. Paul Knapperman. Having waived his diplomatic immunity, instead Mr. Suarez chose not to answer any questions for fear of incriminating himself further, and with this meaning he couldn't and wouldn't say anything. At that point the inquest couldn't proceed, and with that charge, by the time the Director of Public Prosecutions had re-examined the case without enough evidence to re-arrest him, using his diplomatic immunity, Mr. Suarez fled back to Mexico where he was safe. And there he remains, even today. Rachel's father said, "I want him to come back to Britain and tell the police what he knows. It makes me sick that he has rebuilt his life in Mexico. I bet Suarez has a big house and plenty of money, all the things that my Rachel dreamed of, but will never get the opportunity to achieve." He was tracked down by a newspaper 1 year later, and it's true, he was living in a nice house in Mexico City with his wife and 2 children. Having left the embassy, he then worked for Epson Computer Printing Company. Again, he refused to answer any questions regarding the murders, instead stating, "I am innocent and simply trying to help. It's case closed as far as I'm concerned," he said. The frustrated detectives in the UK said that the cases both remain open. "We still have vital questions for Mr. Suarez. Owing to a lack of conclusive evidence, the Crown Prosecution Service could not extradite him back from Mexico, and that is where the case into the murder of Rachel Applewhite remains. The murder of Rachel Applewhite and Marina Monty remains unsolved, but with a very likely suspect whose guilt cannot be proven. D.S. Hutchinson would confirm, I have now ruled out any link that the killings of Rachel and Marina were connected, stating that Mr. Suarez was no longer suspected in Marina, only Rachel. Although that it is believed that there are many similarities between the 2 murders, the time, the place, the small car, the ligatures, the beating, the lost clothing and bags, the vanished handbags and the missing boots. That's exactly what they were, coincidental murders, but by 2 very different killers. As of 2024, 37 years after the murders of Rachel and Marina, they remained unsolved, with no new witnesses nor evidence. It's a cold case, which only gets colder.